Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Hirsch, the Capital Grants and Loans Administrator here at the Maryland Historic Trust, and you're watching the Historic Preservation Capital Grant Program Match Requirement webinar. We recommend that you watch this webinar after you've watched the general overview webinar for the current Historic Preservation Capital Grant round. And just for simplicity, I'm going to refer to the program as the HPCAP program from here on out. The information we'll provide in this webinar will only apply to the HPCAP program. And just to go over why this webinar is only for HPCAP applicants and to help save some of you some time, recent legislative updates to the African American Heritage Preservation Program grant completely removed the match requirements for all applicants. So you no longer have to provide a match at all if you're applying for the AHPP grant. The match requirements for the HPCAP grant program were not changed. And if you're applying as a local government, business, or as an individual, you'll still be required to provide a match. So if you're a nonprofit, state agency, or looking into applying for the AHPP grant program, you don't need to view this webinar to successfully complete an application since no match is going to be required. The HPCAP grant is a highly competitive grant program that focuses on urgent historic preservation capital projects which protect historic architectural features and that demonstrate a strong public benefit and educational component. Almost anyone can apply for the program, and this includes nonprofits, local governments, state agencies, businesses, and individuals, and the maximum grant amount per awardee is $100,000. For more detailed information on the program, I suggest visiting our main program webpage. There's also a link at that webpage to our guidelines and resources page where you can find all the documents you need to complete an HPCAP application, and most importantly, the grant guidelines. You can also find a link to our YouTube channel where you can access previously recorded webinars, including the HPCAP General Overview webinar. Everything we're going to go over in this webinar and more will be outlined in more detail in the grant guidelines. You'll want to keep a few things in mind when thinking about your match. The required match is a one-to-one match, and that means that if you're awarded a $100,000 grant, you're required to provide a match of either cash, in-kind contribution, or a combination of the two that also equals $100,000. The match has to be committed solely to the scope of the capital work in your application. It can't be used for any other portions of a project that weren't mentioned in the specific scope of work that you provided in the application, and that's also in the final grant award agreement if you're awarded. The match has to be used during the grant period, which is 2 years from the date the award was made and noted, and will also be noted in the grant agreement. And you'll need to document the source of the match and what it will be specifically used for in your grant application. You'll also need to document your match when you submit any request for payment to MHT once your grant's been awarded. The match can be any combination of cash and in-kind contributions, and we're going to go over the most common examples of both types of match. However, our guidelines documents has a much more extensive list of examples. Common examples of a cash match include cash donations, loan funds, and fundraiser collections, which are any funds that have been raised to go towards a specific capital project in your application. And common examples of in-kind match sources include discounted or donated materials that you may have received from a local vendor or someone in your community, donated volunteer services, and staff salaries. We're going to delve a little bit more into how to document these in-kind sources later on. When deciding how to pay for your project and structure your budget, it might be good to know a few of the most common uses or examples of what a match covers to help flesh out your project. We often see awardees use a match for specific services when the awardee can't hire through a competitive bidding process. If you're awarded a grant with us, we have a fairly rigorous procurement policy that requires competitive bidding, and any services that are funded directly by MHT have to go through that process. However, your match can be used to quickly procure certain services if you have a specific vendor in mind and you want to go through the state's procurement process. Services provided by the property owner or grantee include things like materials, staff time, or other things that can be donated or quantified that can help provide leverage to the capital project. And if you need a certain type of material or specific construction equipment that you don't want to use the state's procurement process for, your match can help you purchase them a lot more quickly. Sometimes it's just easier to use your match to get things like the permit process rolling, since it can take some time for MHT to disperse your funds once you request them. Permits take enough time as it is, and adding 30 to 45 days might not be helpful if the permit requires immediate payment. Architectural, engineering, or other assessment work can also be used to procure more quickly using the matching funds. And so long as the consulting work will go on to directly inform the capital improvement, the match can definitely be used. Other examples of eligible matching funds include cash spent within the grant period toward the grant scope of work and staff salaries for time spent on the grant project. If using staff salaries as a match, you'll need to track the time the staff member spent working on tasks specifically related to the grant project listed in your approved scope of work. You can also use discounted or donated construction supplies that you might get from a local vendor, volunteer, or someone else from the community. Services donated by a professional, such as an architect or consultant that might be on your board, or volunteer time spent on the contract. Again, if you're going to use volunteer work as a match, the volunteer work hours and average costs should be quantified in your budget. There's a full list of what counts as an eligible match in our grant guidelines. However, if you think you have an eligible match you don't see on our list, feel free to reach out to me and we can figure out if your match would be acceptable. If your project is an acquisition, the match related to the acquisition may be eligible. If grant funds will be used for an acquisition, other funding for the same acquisition could be used as a match. For example, if a property is appraised for $200,000 and is sold to the local government for $100,000, that difference could be used as a match. It's important to note that the cost to acquire property can't be used as a match for a capital project. So if the local government purchased the property for $100,000 and has a $100,000 window restoration project, the $100,000 acquisition cost is not going to be an eligible match. While there are a number of types of eligible match sources, you'll also need to know what funding sources are not eligible for the match. Other state funds are the type of an ineligible match that we get questions about the most often. These include state bond bills, other state grants, or even another grant from this agency. Also keep in mind that the same match for this program can't be used as a match for another state program and vice versa. The match must be solely allocated for this HPCAP program. There's a section in the application as well as the budget spreadsheet where state funds should be discussed. And if you have other state funds that will be used for the project, please make sure you add them as additional sources of funding, even though you can't use them as the match. This will help MHT and make sure that there's not going to be an overlap or a conflict with a different state grant or source of funds. So here are a few more examples of expenses that can't be used for the match and the categories that we get the most questions about. These include insurance costs, appraisals for acquisition, landscaping costs, expenses for hosting meetings, and typical general annual maintenance. Also, the costs associated with hosting fundraisers are not eligible for the match, but the funds that are raised are eligible. So general office expenses such as paper, printer ink, etc., accounting or audit costs, and property taxes are also ineligible to be used for the match. There's a more extensive list of other types of an ineligible match in our grant guidelines. So now let's talk about how to document your match. You'll need to show your match contributions in your application and again after you're awarded a grant when it comes time to requesting payments. One common way to document a cash match is to submit a bank statement or official treasurer's report. Other good examples of cash match documentation include signed letters from donors that show the amount that they are donating and the donor's signature, award letters for non-state grants such as other nonprofit grants or federal grants, loan commitment letters from a bank or some other financial institution, and for government entities specifically, you'll need to submit budget documents to clearly show the line items and that you're committing to this match. If you're going to provide a budget document, please either highlight or label the line item allocated towards the match just so we can make it easier for us to find when we review your application. And when submitting financial documents, please remember to block out or obscure any financial identification numbers or any other private information. Any other private information, like what you might find on bank statements, should also be blocked out. And once you submit an application, these documents become part of your file with us indefinitely. If using an in-kind match, it might take a little bit more of an effort to put together the required documentation and the cash match documentation. So here's a list of the most common uses of an in-kind match and how to document them. We already talked a little bit about staff salary, and if you want to use it as a match, you'll need to make a spreadsheet for the staff that will be working directly on the grant project. And the spreadsheet should show the staff person's name, the number of hours that they're going to work on the grant project, their hourly rates, and a very brief description of what specific tasks they will be performing on the grant. We recommend that the staff person assigned to the grant should sign a document. The signatures are not required, but they're definitely preferred. You can use volunteer hours as your in-kind match, but the volunteer hours must be quantified in the budget with an explanation of how you developed the volunteer cost. For volunteer time, you should calculate the hours using this independent sector website calculator, and you'll need to choose the Maryland rate when you input your figures. All of the volunteer hours need to have a related value, and this tool can help you out. You should also briefly explain what the volunteer time was spent on and how many hours were spent for each volunteer you're documenting. For donated services, we'll need a signed statement from the donor, clearly showing the value of the donated services. An example of this could be an architect, contractor, or tradesperson who's donating their professional services to the project, and they should clearly note their typical rate for the services that they provided. If you're using donated materials toward the match, you'll need to provide a signed statement, receipt, or invoice from the donor, and the statement will need to show the fair market value of the materials or the discounted rate that you got for the materials. Again, guidance on how to document either the cash or in-kind match can be found in our grant guidelines. A few slides ago, I talked about other project funds when I was discussing how other state funds can't be used as a match. If you have a match that goes above and beyond what you're required to provide as a match, also known as other project funds, please put that in the other project funds answer in the application and in the other project funds column in the spreadsheet. These sections are for anything extra beyond the required match. You'll also need to identify the source and amount of these funds in your application, and you should add any state funds that will be used here as well, but they just won't be counted toward the match requirement. It's just really helpful for us to know the total funding being used so we can get a better understanding of the bigger picture for the project. If you have questions about filling out the budget spreadsheet, our HP Cap Journal Overview webinar, which is on MHT's YouTube channel, has much more specific information. To help understand how we'll be reviewing your match or considering if your match is eligible, there are a few questions you should probably keep in mind, or you can always email me if you have any questions about the match, and I'm very happy to help. So some of the things we think about is whether the cost is eligible. Has it been used during the grant period as noted in the grant agreement? Is it related to the approved specific scope of work or budget as noted in the grant agreement, or was it used for something outside of the scope of work in the award? Is the cost actually necessary to complete the project? Is it reasonable? For example, does the cost of an item or service being used for the match line up with the industry standard rates or purchase prices? So is the cost verifiable? Do you have proof like an invoice, receipt, or donor statement that you can show us that the cost went towards a specific scope item? Do you have a salary spreadsheet and pay stub for your staff members that worked on the project? We need to have that proof for the match, and it's really important to show that documentation for in-kind match especially. That's it. I just wanted to include my contact information and links to the website that will have more information about the program, as well as links to the guidelines that will have all the information that we went over today. The slide deck for this presentation is available on our webpage for easier reference. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to contact me. Again, thanks for listening, and we look forward to reviewing your applications.